Hey, what's going on, gang? This is Nate on the Stone, and welcome to the 24th episode of the Rolling Stone. You guys know the drill. This is where I give my initial thoughts, opinion, and analysis of stories that are currently in the news. And our first story this week takes us to Washington, D.C., where Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh finds himself once again in the crosshairs of the woke. Now, just to lay out a little groundwork here, if you will remember last summer of 2018, when President Trump nominated Kavanaugh to replace retiring Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy, several women actually came up during that confirmation process to accuse Kavanaugh of sexual harassment and sexual assault, the most prominent one being Dr. Christina Blasey Ford, who got herself onto one of the covers of Time magazine for her story. Well, now it happens that two New York Times reporters, Kelly Pogrebin and Kate Kelly, last Saturday, they wrote a piece, in the New York Times based on a book, The Education of Brett Kavanaugh. And in this story that Pogrebin and Kelly wrote, they report that Max Stier, a former classmate of Brett Kavanaugh, has now recalled another instance of Brett Kavanaugh sexually assaulting a woman. So, according to Max Stier, the former classmate, Kavanaugh pulled down his pants at a college party and exposed himself to a whole bunch of his classmates. And then Stier continues that another classmate, not Kavanaugh, but another classmate actually took Kavanaugh's package, if you will, and forced another student there at the party, a woman by the name of Tracy Harmon, to fondle it. Now, the Times' story and Stier both say that there was plenty of evidence for this story, and that it was actually submitted to the FBI during their initial investigation background check into Kavanaugh after he was nominated to the Supreme Court. But the FBI didn't investigate it at the time, even though Stier and Pogrebin and Kelly say that there were multiple witnesses to this story. Now, as you would expect, the usual suspects went into overdrive. And the one leading the pack this time was Democratic presidential candidate Julian Castro. He went on to Twitter, as everyone does these days, and he said this in response to this New York Times story. He said, quote, "It's more clear than ever that Brett Kavanaugh lied under oath. He should be impeached, and Congress should review the failure of the Department of Justice to properly investigate the matter." And then Kamala Harris, another presidential candidate for the Democrat Party, she took to Twitter, not to be outdone by Castro. She went on Twitter and said this, quote, "I sat through those hearings. Brett Kavanaugh lied to the U.S. Senate and most importantly to the American people. He was put on the court through a sham process, and his place on the court is an insult to the pursuit of truth and justice. He should be impeached." And all the other presidential candidates on the left, from Elizabeth Warren and Beto O'Rourke, and they all said that Kavanaugh should be impeached. And even when some of the candidates didn't say specifically that Kavanaugh should be impeached, people like Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden, they very heavily insinuated that Kavanaugh is somehow illegitimately on the court and that something needs to be done. And by golly, if they're elected to the presidency, they're going to make sure that something gets done. And it even got to the point that one of the squad members, our beloved squad, our four people, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Ariana Presley. Well, one of their members, in this case, Ariana Presley from Massachusetts, she actually filed a motion of impeachment against Kavanaugh in the House of Representatives. Okay, that is a lot to take in. However, as usual, there's a lot of smoke here, but there is no fire. At least there is not the fire that the left is saying that there is. So, Kavanaugh didn't lie during his initial confirmation process. That is the number one thing that I want to remind everyone today, that Kavanaugh did not lie. When he said that he did not sexually assault or harass the women who claimed that he did, he was not lying. How do we know? Well, we know because the FBI and the Senate Judiciary Committee conducted multiple investigations against him. In fact, the Senate Judiciary Committee released a 414-page report based on their investigations. And the Senate Judiciary Committee chairman, Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, he actually said when this report was released, for example, that witnesses were contradicting each other, there were holes in witness testimony, and most importantly, there was actually no corroborating evidence. There was a lot of hearsay, there was a lot of personal stories and personal testimony, but there was no hard evidence to say that yes, Brett Kavanaugh at this place, at this time, actually sexually harassed witness X, or Brett Kavanaugh sexually assaulted or attempted to assault woman B over here. There was none of that, which is why the Senate voted to confirm him and why he is now on the Supreme Court. So that is what has to be said first and foremost. And even more importantly, the left itself, in a very subtle way, agreed and acknowledged that there was no evidence. There was no hard evidence that would justify Kavanaugh's nomination being torpedoed. Last year, when this whole thing was unraveling, Emily Wolfe at the Houston Chronicle, she wrote this, okay? The lawyer, quote, "The lawyer in me, the woman in me, the American in me, hopes that Kavanaugh's own words are enough to keep him off the court. They should be. Preventing Kavanaugh from being confirmed as a result of Blasey Ford's testimony would, to me, keep the Supreme Court legitimate. It would be a relief to millions of American women and women around the world. However, much damage has already been done," unquote. In other words, it doesn't matter if there is no hard evidence. Brett Kavanaugh's own words, the way he defended himself. Remember, everyone said that he was too angry. He was too vitriolic against these women. He was protesting too much. His own words were condemning him. And we had people on the left give a variation of this excuse, saying that it didn't matter if there was no hard evidence against Brett Kavanaugh. The accusation of the charges were in themselves so serious that his nomination should be ended. He should not be able to sit on the Supreme Court. Never mind that his credentials as a lawyer and a judge were impeccable, and never mind that there was no evidence corroborating any of these claims made against him. The accusations themselves were so serious that that was enough to terminate this whole process. So that's the first thing that I want to reiterate here today. Kavanaugh didn't lie. There were multiple investigations, and he was confirmed because there was no hard evidence, which was agreed upon on the right and on the left. The left a little bit more in a roundabout way, okay? And these new allegations, they have problems too. What sort of problems? Big ones. So, according to Carrie Severino, okay, who wrote a book about Kavanaugh's confirmation hearing in the Senate last year, Max Steyer's story, okay, so remember, Max Steyer is the former Yale classmate of Brett Kavanaugh who spoke to the New York Times reporters, Pogrebin and Kelly, and who gave them this news story about Brett Kavanaugh sexually harassing this woman, Tracy Harmon, okay? However, according to this author, Carrie Severino, Max Steyer's story was given to the FBI and to the Senate Democrats last year when Kavanaugh's confirmation process was ongoing. And neither the Senate Democrats or the FBI picked up the story because they said there's nothing there. There is absolutely no substance to this story. Furthermore, and even more embarrassingly, Tracy Harmon, the woman who, according to Max Steyer, had Brett Kavanaugh's equipment shoved into her face by another student, Tracy Harmon says, "I have absolutely no memory of this." This did not happen. So the woman who ostensibly was sexually harassed is saying, I have no memory of this. I wasn't sexually harassed, which is just, a great embarrassment for the New York Times. In fact, it's become so embarrassing, it became so embarrassing this past week, that the New York Times had to kind of walk back the story and kind of issue a half-hearted, mealy-mouthed mea culpa. In fact, the two reporters who ran the original story, Pogrebin and Kelly, they immediately tried to pass the buck, saying, oh, well, our editors, they didn't catch any of this. They didn't catch any of this. Never mind that you two are the reporters, and you two were supposed to investigate whether these claims were true or not. And also, as reporters, you were supposed to know that this story had already been pushed forward last year, and it was rejected as a big nothing burger. So either you can blame the editors all you want, but a big part of the blame goes to the reporters. So what's happening with all this? That's kind of the whole story of what was going on, okay? So what is happening here? Well, in the first place, it's just more confirmation that every time Trump talked about the press being the enemy of the people, every time he called them fake news, he was right. He was correct for all of the belly aching and for all of the dire head shaking and the stern apocalyptic warnings from the left, especially in the news media in this case, that such talk was dangerous for a democracy. This is going to erode people's faith in the free press. And without a free press, where is a democracy? Where is a free society without all that? For all of their protests to the contrary, this story confirms everything that Trump has said about them, because either A, the New York Times knew full well that this story had no substance to it, and they ran it anyway, simply to turn the heat up again on Brett Kavanaugh during an election year, or two, the New York Times was so blitheringly incompetent that they forgot what had happened between last summer and right now. So you either have a blatant lying or just out and out stupidity and incompetence. And neither one is something that we need in a free press. And neither one. It doesn't matter if you've got a free press or not. If they're liars or if they're incompetent buffoons, they're not going to do you any good. They're not going to do society any good. So that's the first thing. Everything that Trump has said about the press, enemies of the people, fake news, it's true. It's been proved again. Second of all, this really shows the execution of justice, okay? The left is ready to have Kavanaugh's head on a platter for something for which everyone knows that there's no proof. And in fact, in which everyone who is somebody knows that the main witness to this story, the woman who supposedly had the crime committed against her, is saying that there was no crime because it never happened. But it doesn't matter. The left is ready to have Kavanaugh's head on a silver platter. Look at what Castro and Kamala Harris said. Now, why is that? Well, NBC actually gave the game away when they released a story about Kavanaugh and the possibility of him being impeached. And the NBC story was very, very interesting because they said, the odds of him actually being impeached are minuscule. However, it is a really good idea to keep up the talk of impeaching him and to keep up the pressure to have him impeached. And the reason they gave for this was right like this. The NBC story said this, quote, "There's a very strong possibility that because of the Trump nominations, the Supreme Court will refuse to let the next Democratic government address critical issues like climate change. Drawing attention to an unusually unpopular Supreme Court justice may set the table for drawing attention to an increasingly partisan Supreme Court and the potential need for judicial reform. As a bare 5-member majority of the court, 80% of which have been appointed by presidents who first obtained office despite losing the popular vote, continues to aggrandize power power to itself, Democrats will increasingly consider constitutionally permissible measures like expanding the size of the court. Revealing the raw power politics behind Kavanaugh's appointment in particular, and Republican indifference to his character or his truthfulness when testifying before them, can be an important part of this case if it turns out to be necessary, unquote. So, to put it in plain colloquial English, NBC is actually saying that the Democrats, the Democratic Party, the left in general, they have to keep up this pressure on Brett Kavanaugh. They have to continue this hoax of Brett Kavanaugh as a sexual assaulter and as a sexual harasser against women, because it will allow them to push their agenda forward. Damn the fact that there is no evidence. Damn the fact that, the people who supposedly were sexually assaulted said that there was no sexual assault. Damn all that. Damn innocence until proven guilty. Damn the judicial system. Damn equality before the law. We have to have Brett Kavanaugh's head, or at least we have to make a play for Brett Kavanaugh's head in order to push forward our agenda. And it's a very clever trick how they linked the Supreme Court justices with the fact of presidents losing the popular vote but winning the electoral vote, insinuating that there's this huge conspiracy between the Electoral College and the politicization of the Supreme Court that has to be fought for the survival of democracy. So there you have it. That's why this is going on. It's to attain a political agenda, a political end. And why is this bad? Well, I was very recently reminded of a quote by founding father Alexander Hamilton, who said that the first duty of society is justice. And if we sit back and think about that, we're going to see why that is. Because without justice, we can't live in peace with each other. We can't live in harmony with each other. We can't flourish in society without justice, because we know that we don't have a fair shake at everything. If we know that there is a caste system, within the legal system of the law, and we fall around here, and other people fall over here, and we know we're not going to get a fair break, first of all, that it's not going to allow us to actually flourish as human beings. It's not going to allow us to flourish as citizens. Second of all, it destroys peace and harmony because we know that the cards are stacked against us. And this is exactly what is happening here. This is the execution, like I said earlier, of justice. Okay? And now here is the $64 question. If Brett Kavanaugh doesn't deserve justice, if Brett Kavanaugh can be impeached and removed from the Supreme Court after being confirmed because of baseless charges and baseless accusations, again, no evidence for any of this, if that can happen to him because he is an ideological enemy of the left, then anyone who is also an ideological enemy of the left can also have the benefits of the justice system withheld from them, which means automatically that people who do not think in the correct ideological manner are the enemies of the state, which means that we are second-class citizens, which means we are not going to get a fair break. And at that point, everything crumbles, because then you are either living in a tyrannical society or you are going to have civil unrest, civil war, for people to actually regain the justice system so that they do have their rights again, so that they do have the benefits of the justice system as they are supposed to in a free society. Okay? And this also, I think too, shows mafia tactics. This is a classic mafia tactic. And I was thinking about this earlier this week. Even though, think about that, even though they know that the odds of Brett Kavanaugh being impeached are practically nil, they are still going to put a target on his forehead. They are still going to draw out the long knives against him to make him an example. Why do you think that the left comes after people like Trump so hard? Or people like James O'Keefe, who runs Project Veritas? Why do they come out? Because their goal, one of the left's goals, is to make the lives of these people a living hell. Because if you can make their lives a living hell, then you can make them a living example. And you can basically tell society, hey, if you try, to fight for your beliefs, if you try to fight for your ideas, if you try, to make society reflect more of what you think, and we don't like it, this is what's going to happen to you. This is what's going to happen to you. This is what's going to happen to your family. This is what's going to happen to your livelihood. This is what's going to happen, to your children. This is what's going to happen to your home. Is this really the price that you want to pay for it? It's much easier just to go through life, head down, mouth closed, and just kind of float through everything and don't bother about society, culture, or politics. We will take care of all those. It's a very sinister ploy, very old, very sinister, and a completely unbecoming, contradictory to a Republican society, which of course is the whole reason for it, because the whole goal is so that we are not a Republican society anymore. But anyway, that is story number 1. Our next story keeps us in Washington because it has to do with our old friend, as Ricardo Montalban would say, AOC, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, okay, who is now accusing a political action committee of racism against her and saying that this is proof positive that the Republican Party, and basically, people on the right, anyone who is not on the left's side, is just an out-and-out racist and white nationalist, okay? What happened? New Faces GOP, which is the political action committee in question, during the Democratic presidential primary debate a few weeks ago, they ran an ad, okay, where a link was made between AOC's socialist views and the communist regime in Cambodia. The communist regime that brought about the deaths of thousands of people, as communism is wont to do, okay? Now, the person who was narrating this ad, okay, her name is Rachel Heng. She is herself Cambodian, and in fact, her family escaped from the communists of Cambodia, okay? So she actually has had skin in the game. This Rachel Heng is a woman of color, being Cambodian, whose family escaped the communist horrors of Cambodia. She is the one who was narrating this ad that New Faces GOP, the Political Action Committee, ran during the Democratic presidential primary debate. Now, for fairness, okay, because we love being fair here on The Stone. We love being just. I am going to play for you the entire ad, okay? It's only about 30 seconds long, and you will see it from start to finish. Here it is.
This is the face of socialism and ignorance. Does Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez know the horror of socialism? My father was minutes from death in Cambodia before a forced marriage saved his life. That's socialism. Forced obedience, starvation. Mine is a face of freedom. My skin is not white. I'm not outrageous, racist, nor socialist. I'm a Republican.
Okay, so if you notice, there was absolutely no mention of color. There was no mention of race. There was no even mention of sex. Like, oh, AOC is a woman. No. The only thing mentioned was that there is a connection between her socialist views and what happened in Cambodia, because more often than not, ideas like the ones that AOC is pushing lead to what happened in Cambodia under the communists. Okay, that was the only link made between them. No talk of race, no talk of sex, no talk of ethnicity, nothing whatsoever. But the reason why this ad was so terrible was because of racism. So, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she took to Twitter, okay, and she let out a couple of tweets actually. She said first, quote, "This wasn't an ad for young conservatives of color, that was the pretense. What you just watched was a love letter to the GOP's white supremacist base," unquote. And then she said this, also on Twitter, quote, "Republicans are running TV ads setting pictures of me on fire to convince people they aren't racist. Life is weird," unquote. And that was the whole point of contention, because the ad started off with a picture of AOC that was set on fire so that it revealed some of the killing fields in Cambodia. That is why it was racist, because a picture of AOC was set on fire. That is what made it racist, okay? And Ultraviolet, which is a women's advocacy group, they even took it a step further. They said that this was actually inciting violence against AOC. They went to Twitter and they said, quote, "This ad is abhorrent, literally burning AOC and promoting violence against a sitting member of Congress. How did you let this air, ABC?" unquote. Okay. First of all, only an ideologue would be able to look at this ad and say that it was racially motivated again. Okay, this is actually these quotes and these reactions, especially the one from Ultraviolet. It really shows again, really demonstrates again the hypocrisy and the double standard of the left. The idea, which is even more insidious when you sit down and think about it, because the double standard really says that there are two sets of rules. There are rules for us, and then there are rules for you, okay? That is what really makes it insidious. But it really showed this double standard, this idea that there are two sets of rules for two sets of people, because if you will cast your mind back to, for example, Kathy Griffin, who was able to, held up a model of a decapitated Trump head splattered in blood and gore, and the left came to her defense. I mean, chronically, they came to her defense, saying that she's a comedian. This was supposed to be, dark humor and satire, and this was her freedom of speech. Why are people getting after her for doing this? Trump can't take a joke. Conservatives can't take a joke, etc., etc., etc. So that's fine. Kathy Griffin holding up a severed Trump head splattered in blood and gore, that's fine. However, a visual of a picture of AOC burning to show the killing fields of Cambodia, that is a step too far. That is not only racist, somehow, but that is also inciting violence against the sitting member of Congress. I mean, holy heck, I'm glad that these people, didn't live in the 18th, 19th century. I mean, they would have strokes when they witnessed, what people did when they wanted to express their disappointment in a political figure. I mean, they would have seizures and just keel over and die, I'm convinced, if they actually knew and were actually able to go back into a time machine or a TARDIS or something and see what happened in the 18th and 19th century in that regard. But I want to come back to this idea that it's racist, because that's really the main thrust of this whole story, that this ad was racist. It wasn't racist. In fact, this story doesn't show anything. It doesn't show anything about the GOP. It doesn't show anything about the right or anything. It really shows something about the left. And it shows, in a sense, the unseriousness of the left. It shows that the unseriousness of the left, because it really shows that the terms racist and racism don't have any meaning anymore. They've been hollowed out, completely made devoid of any sort of meaning, because now racist and racism, they're just adjectives, they're just words thrown to describe anything that someone doesn't like. You don't like that? It's racist. You don't like that? It's racist. You don't like people wearing sombreros For Cinco de Mayo, it's racist. You don't like people dressing up as Indians for Halloween, that's racist. For example, you don't like it when schools serve, Vietnamese food for white people, and because they don't prepare the dish exactly as they do in Vietnam, that's racist. All of these things, it's not racist. It's simply now a word that is used to describe something that someone doesn't like. And it's a very effective word because even though the word is being hollowed out and continues to be hollowed out by its mistreatment like this, we still have an innate understanding of what that word means. We know that racism is evil. We have a moral abhorrence towards it. So that's why it's such an effective word. The left knows that if they label something as racist, people are going to have this knee-jerk gut reaction against whatever it is that has been labeled with that word. That's why it's so politically effective. Unfortunately, what this shows is just another level of their unseriousness, or I should say not just their unseriousness, their uncaring, their callousness, because they're not content with just allowing a word to retain its own meaning, so that that word has power as a reflection of reality, so that that word can remain to actually describe something that is genuinely racist and evil. Instead, in order to make a political gain in the here and now, they are willing to hollow out a word for their own political gain. A word that is still needed because, unfortunately, as I've said, while systematic racism is a thing of the past, praise the Lord, there are always going to be racists in the world of all colors and all stripes against all different sorts of people, because racism is just one way that evil manifests itself in the world, and we all have evil in our hearts, right? As Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, the line between good and evil is a narrow one and is in the hearts of every man and woman. So instead of allowing the word to retain its meaning so that we can actually, judge, when someone actually does or says something that is genuinely hateful and racist, genuinely racist, we can't describe it as racist anymore because now the word is being used to describe all these sorts of different things, simply so that the left can gain power, either in politics or the culture. And it is also shows their callousness and their unseriousness, because if words like this are hollowed out, if words like this lose their meaning, then how can we have a conversation? The way that I use the word racist, which is again the old-fashioned definition of the word, you hating an individual or a group because of their ethnicity or their skin color, is very different from how someone on the left will use the word racist. And when you're using the same word, right, the same sound is coming out of your mouth, but it's not the same word anymore because you're acting on two completely different wavelengths, two completely different definitions. You can't have a conversation because you're talking past each other. You might think that you're talking about the same thing because you're saying the same sounds, you're repeating the same sounds, but you're not saying the same words anymore. You're not using the same meanings. And if that happens, I might as well be speaking English and someone over here might as well be speaking German or ancient Greek or something like that. We have absolutely no comprehension of what the other person is saying, which means that we can't have a conversation. And unfortunately, if you can't have a conversation, what's the point of Republican society? And how can you even keep a Republican society? Again, free speech is a natural and a constitutional right, not only because it reflects the dignity and the rational nature of man, but because in a Republican society, we are supposed to be looking for the greater and the common good. And we do this by discussion, argument, asking questions, debating, analyzing, which in many cases we all do with each other through speech, right? But if we can't have speech because we can't have conversation because we don't have words anymore, not only is there no point really to Republican society, but Republican society can't even exist. And then, of course, and the third point of this is that this is classic obfuscation. Because this charge was made, again, going back to the fact that racism is now just a word to tack on to something you don't like. This word was specifically chosen so that the conversation would specifically be about whether this ad was racist or not. I myself, in highlighting this problem, am inadvertently playing into the game because I'm talking about whether the ad is racist or not, talking about words and the necessity of their meanings, instead of the actual conversation that this ad was supposed to do. The link, and whether that link is real or not, between the socialist ideas of AOC and the Squad and the communism of Cambodia that led to the killing fields, etc., etc., right? That's what this whole purpose was, and we've demonstrated it right here again. Obfuscation. Get people to look over here at whether the ad is racist or not, and don't look too closely over here, which was the entire point of the ad, the link between AOC socialism and communism in Cambodia. But that is story number 2. And our third and final story for this video of the Rolling Stone takes us to the Midwest. Have you ever heard of Dr. Ulrich Klopfer? If you haven't, you are very lucky, because Dr. Klopfer, and I'm very hesitant actually to even use the title doctor to describe him, he was a former abortionist. Former because his license was actually suspended in 2016, and former because this past week he was actually found dead in his house. So he is a former abortionist twice over. Now, the first reason why he was a former abortionist, because his license was suspended, is a very morbid story, and a very disgusting story too. His license was suspended because he had this habit, if you will, of chronic abuse. For example, he did not report the statutory rape of a 13-year-old girl and a 10-year-old girl. Okay, and this was actually a habit with him. He was very abusive, would not report things like rape or anything in the women to whom he gave abortion, which is why finally in 2016, the state of Indiana took away his abortionist license and said, you can't do this anymore because you are actually, even by the standards of the culture today, you are hurting women, which has to be really, really bad. But I don't want to talk about, this story isn't about that. The story is what happened after he died, okay? So he was found deceased in his home. The police came in because it was an unattended death. And while they were going about his home, while they were looking about, his possessions, they found 2,246 fetal remains in his house. In other words, they found the bodies of the babies that he had aborted. He had collected them. 2,246 of them. Okay? But even that's not the real story that we're talking about this time around, as horrific as that is. What we're talking about today is the reaction that presidential candidate Mayor Pete Buttigieg had towards this story, because Pete Buttigieg had to say something, because Klopfer was a practitioner. He was an abortionist in Mayor Pete's city of South Bend, Indiana. So Buttigieg had to say something for the record. He couldn't ignore it. And he said that he hoped that this story wouldn't become political, and that it should not reflect the legality of abortion. Okay, Mayor Pete said that he hoped that this story, that Ulrich Klopfer, former abortionist, collecting 2,246 aborted baby bodies, wasn't going to become political, and that they should have absolutely nothing to do about the conversation of the legality of abortion. Okay, here's a couple of things, okay? And I'm going to just spit out the first one off the top of my head. It's the least important one, but I just wanted to spit this out there, okay? Let me remind you all, gang, that the left has a habit of politicizing every single thing that happens in life and in the world. We saw last week that eating a chicken sandwich from a fast food restaurant chain is actually political violence against gay people, because if you eat a Chick-fil-A sandwich, you are actually saying that you want gay people to be erased and you want their lives to be a living hell. So, if eating a chicken sandwich from a fast food restaurant is political, I think that there is room to take a political angle on this story, okay? Just my uninformed, uneducated layman's opinion, but I think there's room to squeeze that in. So that's the first point, okay? But here's the second point. This story should absolutely be made political, okay? Collecting the bodies of babies that you have aborted, that is not normal behavior, even in this crazy, pineapple, upside down world that we live in. We should all be able to agree that that is not normal, okay? We would all look at a guy who collected dead bodies off the street as abnormal. We would all kind of lean back if someone said that his hobby was killing kittens and then just collecting their bodies, right? Not even stuffing them, not even practicing taxidermy for purposes of preservation and education, like for museums. No. He just goes out, finds kittens, drowns them or kills them somehow, and then he just keeps the bodies, preserves their bodies enough that they don't rot away, but then he just keeps them. Okay, we would all automatically shy away from those types of people. So the fact that a man collected the bodies of babies that he had aborted, that is not normal. That is abnormal. That is that is a sickness, I would even say, of the mind. And there is definitely room to make that political just on that. Why? Because behavior that disregards normalcy and decency to that degree, okay? That sort of behavior, something like this, something as jaw-dropping as that, okay? There is room to have a political conversation about this, because again, we are all part of political society. We all have to live with each other, get along with each other. We all have to tolerate each other, which means that we have to have at least some sort of basic standards of normalcy and decency, so that if someone really goes off the wall bonkers, we can intervene, so that society doesn't start coming undone from the seams. This is one of those behaviors. I'm going to draw a line in the sand here, gang. This is one of those behaviors. Another reason why we should have a political conversation about this, why there is nothing wrong with making this conversation political. But there's another reason too. There is a serious conversation to be had about how abortion makes us callous. Okay? For example, just a few weeks ago, Leroy Carhart, okay, who performs late-term abortions even up to birth in Maryland and Nebraska, he admitted that he knows perfectly well that he's killing a baby. And in fact, that kind of shocked the interviewer who was interviewing him, because she said, oh, most people don't use the term baby. They'll say, the fetus or the organism or something else. And Carhart just out and out said, oh, no. I know it's a baby, and I use the word baby with the families. And then he went on to say, after admitting that his job is actually killing babies, he then went on to say that he loves his job. If you had anyone else who said, my job is killing puppies, I love killing puppies, that man would not only have his house burned down by a mob, not only would that man be arrested for animal cruelty, But whether it was, the city council or a state legislature, there would be new legislation put in place to punish sickos who would do this, to make sure that that sort of thing never happened again. Okay? Apparently, though, it can happen here with abortions. There was another example last year. Another abortionist, Leah Torres, said that she keeps babies that she's aborting from screaming by snipping the cord. She said on Twitter, quote, "I transect the cord first, so there's really no opportunity if they're even far enough along to have a larynx," i.e., she cuts their cord so that they can't scream. Again, assuming that these are people, actual people that she is killing, but she doesn't like them screaming because for whatever, it jangles her nerves or something, and so she cuts the cord so that they can't scream. Okay? These are abortionists. And there is a very serious conversation to be had about the callousness, okay, that abortion brings about, not just on the people who perform abortions, but on the rest of society. Because if we accept that, yes, that thing developing in a woman's womb, that is actually a baby, right? But it's perfectly all right to abort that baby at any time during the pregnancy, then really what we're saying is that children are completely sacrificial, right? You don't want a child, you don't have to have a child. And then we start having this callousness and this hardness of heart towards children. And then if we have that mentality towards children, who we are naturally supposed to love. I mean, that's why babies are just so cute, because that is kind of their weapon. It's kind of like, I can't be, yes, you might be, you're frazzling me, you're driving me insane with everything that you need and trying to keep you happy, but gosh darn it, you know what, I just hold you and you look at me with those big eyes and you smile at me and, and everything, and it just melts my heart. It just melts my heart, even if you're not related to the baby. Haven't you ever seen, a girl, walking down the street and say, "Oh, a baby," or even some guys, what? I know I do, looking at, a newborn baby, because it reminds me of when, some of my siblings were young. And it just gives you this feeling of alive, like there is life out here. There is life, and life is always good. But if we start having that callousness towards those babies, towards this, this unmined potential for their lives, towards the beginning of life itself, that is going to spread throughout the rest of society. And pretty soon we're going to be callous towards everyone and everything that isn't directly connected to us. We're still going to protect and have feelings for maybe some of the things that are closest to us because they belong to us or they're connected to us. They're important. But everything else is going to be like, who cares? They live, they die, it doesn't matter. And that callousness, that carelessness, that uncaringness is something that is impossible to sustain, right? As well as society. You have to have some sort of sympathy, you have to have some sort of compassion in society in order for it to survive. Not only that, but just for us to be human. Just for us to be human, to witness and to see and to acknowledge the suffering of others, and then to do our damnedest to actually try and alleviate that suffering. That's one of the things that makes us human. You get rid of it, and basically what we have become is worse than even Ebenezer Scrooge. We've become these cold-hearted, unfeeling automatons that as long as our little sector of the universe and of life is okay, we don't give a damn about what happens anywhere else. That's why this story, contrary to what Pete Buttigieg says, needs to be made political. Not just so that, this sort of behavior does not happen again, just so, the bodies of babies aren't desecrated like this, but so that we do not lose our capacity to actually be human. But anyway, as usual, gang, I have talked for too long, so I'm cutting off the video here. Happy Friday, have a great weekend, and I will see you on Tuesday. Ciao.